To call the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series anything short of a cultural milestone would be underselling it. For almost its entire 25+ year run, the franchise has been praised for its gameplay, graphics, and level design. But one aspect that has always stood out, at least for me, is its soundtracks. The Tony Hawk Pro Skater soundtracks have become iconic, and I think it's pretty safe to say that they've played a significant role in shaping contemporary alternative music. So let's take a closer look and find out how they influenced a generation. So firstly, what tracks were featured in these games and who had the pressure of picking them? Well, as I'm sure you know, the soundtracks were a healthy mix of punk, ska, hip-hop, and alternative rock, and were curated by music supervisor and producer Brian Bright. And boy, he did a pretty good job. The soundtracks were a perfect fit for the games, and were much more than your average background music. Instead, they were an integral part of the experience. They really helped to create a sense of energy and excitement that augmented everything more than anyone could have predicted. And while at least in my opinion, there's not been a game in the series that's had a particularly weak soundtrack, it's the first 4 Pro Skater titled games that you often see on nostalgic Spotify playlists. Why? Because they introduced a new generation of kids to alternative music during a time when it was desperately needed. And please don't blast me for these opinions, I still love Korn, I still love Slipknot, I still love Limp Bizkit, just go with it. Grunge was dead, nu metal was on the rise, and pop-punk was starting to get a bit stale. But then came along the first Pro Skater game with its eclectic mix of tracks, looking to shine a light on artists that had been making waves on the pre-internet underground. Suddenly, a whole new generation of kids were getting introduced to the likes of Goldfinger, Bad Religion, the Suicide Machines, just to name a few. The immeasurable success of these first games, and by proxy the music that accompanied them, helped to legitimize these bands in the eyes of the music industry. All of a sudden, record labels were taking notice of these once underground acts, and signing them to pretty big record deals. We'll talk a bit about some of the genres that the Tony Hawk games featured, but you can't really start anywhere other than the punk and pop-punk scene. Bands like The Offspring, Blink-182, and Green Day were already reaching a peak of popularity by the time of these games' releases, but exposure on the Pro Skater soundtracks strapped a rocket to this. I don't think it's a stretch to suggest that pop-punk wouldn't be as popular as it is today, for better or worse, mostly worse, without these games. What's thankfully a lot more wholesome is Pro Skater's impact on the ska scene. Bands like Less Than Jake, the Mighty Mighty Boss Stones, and particularly Goldfinger are now intrinsically linked to these games. Like, I immediately don't trust anyone who listens to Superman and doesn't want to pull off a triple kickflip. I'm just saying. Ska might not be as ubiquitous in modern culture as pop-punk, which honestly I have my own problems with that to start with, but it lives on thanks to this series. Away from the guitars, drums, and being afraid of anything with more than 4 chords, hip-hop was also well represented in Pro Skater. The game introduced a new generation of listeners to hip-hop icons like Public Enemy, Jurassic 5, and NWA. Now, full disclosure, in my ignorant youth, I often skip past these tracks, cause I grew up in a house where rock and punk were put on a pedestal, and above pretty much all genres of music. But as I grew older and broadened my horizons, I realized how incredible these songs are. Not only do they match the energy and ethos of anything else on the soundtrack, but the socially conscious lyrics arguably have more of a place in the counterculture-driven skate scene than cheesy breakup songs. Again, a grossly over-exaggerated generalization, but you get what I mean. It would be remiss not to mention the community that these soundtracks fostered too. I'm super lucky to be able to interview bands and artists from all over the world for our music channel, link probably somewhere down in the description. And when I talk about their influences and inspiration, a real common thread is the soundtrack of these games. Whether they be fans of hip-hop, punk, metal, or any other subgenre, it's a shared experience that players can instantly bond over. Okay, it may be baked into nostalgia, a reminder of a simpler time when life was all about skating, hanging out with your friends, and listening to music. But is that really such a bad thing? The only real shame is, with regular game releases a thing of the past, and remakes more likely than new entries whatsoever, the chances of us getting a full-fat, new and numbered Tony Hawk Pro Skater game are looking pretty slim. And look, maybe this isn't a bad thing. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5 was awful, and sometimes it's just better to leave the memories alone. But it means that we're unfortunately unlikely to see another suite of tracks influence a generation quite like they did back in the day. Sure, listening habits have changed, and even if it did happen, it might not make the waves the games of old did. But I'd wager that any band worth their salt would treat a feature in a Tony Hawk Pro Skater game as a badge of honor. But did you play the Tony Hawk Pro Skater games back in the day, and do you have any favorite tracks that stick out in your memory? Please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts. One that sticks out for me is Not the Same by Body Jar. I mean, I don't think I've heard another song by this band, but my god, that's a bop. But anyway, if you like this video and you want to see more stuff about all things gaming, then why not hit subscribe, drop a like, all the shares, it really helps us out. And for now, my name is Tom, this has been UDS, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye!